Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, Buffalo, New York, 25th of October 2006, approximately 10 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Francis S. Lucca, L-U-C-C-A, born May 10th, 1925 in Buffalo, New York.
Okay, what was your educational background prior to entering service?
Prior to entering service, a high school graduate. I graduated from high school on June 22nd, 1943, and I was drafted into the Navy June 24th, 1940. 2 days later, I was in the Navy.
Okay. Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, I was about 16 years old. We were just walking, my parents and I were walking from church, and we had taken a walk down Delaware Avenue or Main Street, and then we could hear bells ringing, and we heard some of the radios coming, a radio broadcast coming from the nearby buildings, some of the mansions, then we found out that we were at war. I was 16 years old at the time.
Do you remember a reaction that you had at the time?
Well, just sort of surprised and shocked, because you know, the last war was only about 20-some years, and we were talking about World War I, and we never even dreamed it would be that was a war to end all wars, so we thought.
Okay. You were drafted, you said, when were you drafted?
Well, first of all, when I was 18 and May 10th, 1943, I went down to the Navy recruiting office and I wanted to sign up for the Navy. And he said, sure, fine. I said, you know, and then I'm graduating next month. He said, no, we're taking you immediately. I said, I only have a month to go. She said, take your chances with the draft. So on May 10th, I signed up for the draft, and by June 10th, I was already had my notice 1A and everything, so I was gone.
So you were drafted into the Navy?
Well, actually, that's another story. We were in line, there was a whole bunch of Navy guys, the chief petty officer, go, and then they stopped. He said, okay, Sergeant, it's your turn. And I said, oh, no. I said, I had my heart set on the Navy, and the sergeant and the chief petty officer looked at each other, and I said, I tried to enlist and so forth, and they said, okay, take him, Chief. So the chief petty officer took me, and the guy behind me said, me too, I also wanted to go in the Navy, and about 30 years later he called me up. He says, Fran, he said, he's from North Tonawanda, he's an old fire chief. I said, do you remember your number? I forgot mine and I need it. I said, yeah, it was 086-18-2058. He says, good, I'm all 2059, so he got into the Navy too. We often wondered what would have happened if gone in the Army. It's one of those things.
Yeah. Why did you want to be in the Navy?
I don't know, my uncle was a seagoing man. He was sort of a role model. He was about 10 or 12, 15 years older. And when he was 16, he went to the China Seas, and I always remember him telling me stories of China and the great sailing ships he was on. And I just liked the idea of, I figured, a clean sack and 3 square meals a day.
Okay, where did you go for your basic?
I went to Sampson, New York, which is outside of Geneva, and today it's a state park, beautiful, and I've been back there a couple of times, and all they had was the brig for a museum, but I was never in the brig then.
It was a fully developed base probably by the time you were there, with permanent buildings.
Oh yes, I was there in '43, and I probably was a year or two old, old by the time I got there. It was fully operational.
Okay. How long were you at Sampson?
Well, we were there like 3 months for boot camp, and then another month or so for OGU, outgoing unit. And then I was fortunate enough to get into the radio school, and I was supposed to get out of there in December, but I came down with a scarlatina type disease, and I didn't get out of there till January. Then I caught my ship.
What ship were you assigned to?
I was assigned to a brand new type of vessel called a destroyer escort. I was on the USS Burrows, the DE destroyer escort 105, and their job primarily is to relieve all of the destroyers in the Atlantic and use them for convoy,
Mhm.
convoying ships to England and North Africa for the invasions of southern France and Normandy.
So with the Burrows, your duties were almost exclusively convoy duty then?
Exclusively convoy duty. My basic job was a radio operator, radioman, and then during general quarters, I was on a 40 millimeter gun, as it was pom-pom guns that you see.
Did you make any contact with any subs or anything?
Well, 2 years in the Atlantic and about maybe 6 months in the Pacific. I'd say we had about 20, couple of dozen attacks with depth charges and our K guns. We were an anti-submarine killer group, and we made a lot of contact. We saw a lot of oil and debris come up, but we never was able to hang around to really chalk it up on our stack as a kill. But out of the 2 dozen attacks, we must have had a few, definitely had a few submarines, both German and Japanese, but it was never, we never had it
Never confirmed.
confirmed, but we're pretty sure that all that debris couldn't have been wrecks down there.
Mm-hmm.
How many crossings did you have of the Atlantic?
Well, I missed the first shakedown cruise. Our ship went to Ireland to take the place of a destroyer escort that was sunken, and USS Leopold. And when they came back in February or March of 1944, I came aboard, and I had made 14 Atlantic crossings, which would be 8 round trips to both England, Scotland, and North Africa.
Okay. All right. Did you have any particular experiences you want to talk about in these crossings that maybe some stand out over others? Or?
Yeah, there's several of them. Our first convoy, let me say that I was seasick for about 9 months, just like a pregnant woman apparently, with morning sickness. But we hit a hurricane in 1944 in September, and that's the last time I got seasick, and that was horrendous. We were off of New London, Connecticut, when we got the message that the pretty bad storm was coming, September 1944, about the 11th of September. And our skipper was an old-time Boston seaman, real seaman. And he goes ashore in New London, and he tells the commandant there he's taking a ship out to sea. And the commandant says, probably a 90-day wonder at one time, oh, no, you can't do that, you're ordered to stay right where you are. And then our skipper just looked at him and he said, I'm taking that ship out. I said, we're loaded with ammunition, K guns, depth charges. All we have to do is get slammed against the dock and half a New London goes up in the air. Needless to say, we went out and took the ship out. Excuse me. It was a frightening storm. I'd say that probably a category maybe 2 today, about 125-mile-an-hour winds. And the EE is only 300 feet long. In 1 minute, we're rolling 60-some degree rolls, believe it or not, even more probably. In 1 minute, we're looking up 50, 60 feet at the waves, and the next minute, we're looking down into the waves. Of course, we couldn't go topside. We went on in the quarter house there. We could look out the window. And but we couldn't operate the radio, so when we couldn't be on duty except those that were engineers and steering the ship, so we'd be lashed in our bunks. And in our Atlantic crossings, we were always in our clothes, except our shoes, and then a life belt with us. But the most terrifying bit was the ship would go up on its fantail and shake and come slamming down. And we're strapped and we're sitting on our heads practically, and all of a sudden the lights go out. And that's frightening, because you're below deck, the lights are out, and you're up like this, and you're wondering, are we going to come back down again, or are we going to flip over? And fortunately, we rode out the storm, and the captain called us topside, and we got under the eye of the storm. We all went, it was like going into a strange world. It was sepia colored. It was just very strange and just unearth-like. But he got us through that. That was probably one of the most frightening times that I had aboard ship. Well, our first trip out, being a green sailor, we were called the general quarters, and at that time, I was to go below deck and hand up 3-inch shells. And I remember that on the way to general quarters, the chief grabbed me by the shoulder and shook me, and he says, "Where do you think you're going?" To my duties. And I had a lighted pipe in my mouth. So he sort of dressed me down a little, and I learned quickly. And the only time that we really had close contact with the enemy was in that first trip out. And I could remember hearing under the PA system, over the PA system, that there was a torpedo and starboard bow. And then, okay, hard left rudder, right rudder, whatever it was, and they made a diversion. And I could hear the torpedo going by the starboard by the ship, bow of the ship. Our skin is only that, very thin skin on it. These ships were built in 30 days, and they weren't meant to last too long. But I could hear that swishing by, and I wasn't frightened. It was more of a rush of excitement, and that was probably the closest we ever came to being sunk. Now, we escorted thousands of ships, maybe close to 1,000, hundreds, maybe 1,000 ships in all those convoys to and from, with troops and supplies and tankers and you name it. And our claim to fame is we never lost a ship. And that first trip was a little scary, and that was to Swansea, Wales. And my first time overseas, and we were docked, and alongside of us they were loading coal in Swansea, square pieces of coal onto little flat cars. And I was eating an orange, and one guy looks up and I said, "Would you like an orange?" I sort of threw him an orange. About 2 hours later, I was back on deck, and I could see he still had the orange sticking onto his back. I said, "Aren't you going to eat your orange?" He said, "Oh no, and I'll bring it home to my children." He said, "They've never seen an orange." So I didn't realize that they never saw that kind of fresh fruit in Wales. So I went down to my sack and took the pillowcase off, went to the galley, filled it up with oranges, came out, and I said, "Here." And I could just see that boy had tears down his eyes. It's the first time these kids have seen. And that was sort of an eye-opener too. I've been to some of the cities in Plymouth, England, and Southampton, and saw the devastation. And I wrote home, we were so lucky, not to have been hit in any way. And these people they were so strong, they're so courageous, and they went through so much, and that affected me quite a bit. And another trip that was probably the most memorable was a convoy taking over 100 trips to North Africa. We had already done our job for the invasion of Normandy, but we still had to get supplies into southern France from North Africa. It was a long convoy. Usually a convoy took 7-8 days. It took about almost 2 weeks. And going over there, we're sitting around having our chow, and of course in the rough weather, our trays are up and are down. But anybody that's been in that North Africa run will tell you that when you see them sitting down for chow and they have their bread and they're putting the bread up to the light and putting it down again, they're picking little gnats out. Apparently it was so hot that all of all of the dough, all of the wheat, yeast, whatever, just had these little gnats. So all we did was pick those gnats out. There's nothing wrong. It was still delicious. But North Africa was probably the greatest of all of our stops in the Atlantic. We go ashore in our skivvy shirts or t-shirts. We maybe put 3 or 4 of them on, and we take them off and sell them to the Arabs for a few francs so that we could buy a little cognac. We wouldn't want to drink their beer or their wine or their whiskey because we weren't sure. So we did that the first time out in Liberty, and about the 3rd day in Liberty, in Bizerti, I saw this Arab walking down the street, and so help me God, on the back of his tunic was Lucca FS. Somebody had stolen my mattress cover and sold it. So that was quite a revelation. One of my buddies, but we did that to get a few francs for our little cognac and for our souvenirs. I pulled a shore patrol in Bizerti, and we were into the area where the Allies were not allowed. It was a little girly house, and I'm swinging my stick, you know, trying to look tough and old at, what, 18 and a half, 19 years old. I had my hat down, and all of a sudden the billy club slipped out of my hand and went sailing. And there's the biggest Arab I had ever seen. Believe me, he was so mean looking, and that stick went flying and hit him on the elbow. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he reached down, and then he toothless smile and handed back the billy stick. And that was a frightening moment, because I was the only American in that area. And we also hitchhiked to Tunis. And well, in Bizerti, they had like little huts, little shacks with an open door, and a little fire pot, and little chickens and goats running around, a little fire pot and a hole in the roof for the smoke. And that was very primitive, but that was interesting. But in Tunis, there was a curfew as far as out of bounds. You couldn't go into this area because they had little houses of recruit and so forth. But they also served some pretty good dinners, I heard, and they served cognac. So I decided I'm just going to go over there and have a good meal, and that's all I wanted was a nice steak dinner and a little cognac. And I remember the steak, beautiful piece of steak, little brown potatoes and vegetables, and a little cognac. And no girlies, that's all right. So as I left and crossed into the area in Tunis, the shore patrol grabbed me. And he talked to me and he said, you know, that's off bounds. I said, look, I know. I said, but I just wanted a nice meal. And he said, what did you have? I said, I had steak, potatoes. Did you enjoy it? I said, it was delicious. Well, maybe it was worth it. He said, how long have you been in North Africa? I said, oh, we've been here a couple of weeks. I said, I even had shore patrol in Bizerti. Oh, you did? You like it here? Yeah. And you've been here a couple of weeks? I said, yeah. I said, tell me, in all the time you've been here, have you seen any dogs? And then it dawned on me. So I don't know if I had a German Shepherd or a Doberman or a police dog or whatever it was. It was delicious, and I didn't feel too good after that. But that was a good experience in North Africa. And our Atlantic days were over after, well, probably the end of 1945. Then we went to the Pacific, but during the time at 45, we enjoyed the rush from the VE Day to war in Europe over, and the sadness and President Roosevelt dying, and I have all those messages. I was already, and I have copies of everything, and they're interesting to read.
How did you feel? Did that come on while you were there?
See, that all this, during my time in the wartime, all of the messages were in coded groups, 5 coded groups. But then we handed to our communications officer, and he would decode it for us. And but I think these came in plain English. And it was a shock, you know, and we felt quite bad. And it was a thrill when we heard that the war in Europe was over, and we didn't have to go to coded groups anymore. There was a time taking code where the Germans would jam us around Gibraltar. The codes would be like in da 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 in different pitches, and we'd have to reach way in the back of our head to get the one that da 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 NSS Washington. And it was very difficult because the jamming would come in, and we were told just keep hitting the keyboard, and let your communications officer worry, because when they decode it, if the word is like historical, HIS, and there's no O or R, different letters, they could still make out. In the one trip, we were told that the whole German submarine fleet was waiting for our convoy. This was on a trip to Africa too. Was waiting for our convoy, and believe it or not, the one message that I copied was the one that told of the danger, and we had a battleship with us, a cruiser, and none of those sailors or radiomen were able to get that message. So we diverted the whole convoy, and we missed the submarines, and we also missed the bombers, which the convoy ahead of us was 80% wiped out, and the convoy after us was 70–80% wiped out, and our convoy was spared. And one other reason it was probably spared, that all of our ships laid smoke, and we laid a big smoke screen over the entire convoy. And we could hear the bombers going over, but they weren't sure where we were. So we were very lucky. We were very lucky, and I think that God was with us all the time that we were in the Navy, because we had a lot of close calls, but never a casualty. And then we went into the Pacific, and that's another story.
Well, you went in the Pacific, was that for the invasion of Japan?
Right. Well, we got to Pearl Harbor July, early part of July, and I think at the time they were talking about invading Japan around October or November. But as we were in Pearl Harbor, our little DE started rocking, and we saw this giant ship come past us. And I said, my God, what is that? I didn't know. That's a cruiser. I said, which one is it? It's the Indianapolis. He said, my cousin Frank Lucca is on that. My gosh, so I go up to the flying bridge and the signalman, and I said, signal over there, flash over there, because my cousin Frank Lucca, this is Fran Lucca, his cousin, get together at Pearl, we'll have a couple of beers. And they flashed back, sorry cousin, we're not staying, we're heading south. So they just roared in there and roared back out, and not ever knowing what the reason was. The Indianapolis was carrying the components for the atomic bomb that would be dropped on August 6th and 8th on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He didn't know that. The skipper knew, and a few people aboard. So they went to the island of Tinian and unloaded the components for the atomic bomb. And then they left to go to the Philippines, and through some kind of mix-up, nobody knew where the Indianapolis was. And the first thing I knew, copying a coded message that was given to me in plain language, that the Indianapolis was lost and probably sunk. Well, nobody knew about that until VJ Day. The big story came out, the war is over, VJ Day. And then down in the corner was U.S. Indianapolis. They waited until that time to break the news, but I heard about it maybe weeks earlier, and I wrote to my dad just saying, I'm sorry to hear about Frankie's ship, I hope he's okay. And it got through the census, so then my Uncle John realized that something was wrong with his son's ship, the Indianapolis. Well, to make a long story short, he survived that.
He did.
Out of about 1,200 men, 316 survived with 5 days in the water, being eaten by sharks. 300 out of 1,200, and that was horrendous. But that had an awful effect on me all during the time, too, wondering what happened to him. But we we were being prepared for the invasion, and we were off of Okinawa, which had just been secured a couple of months earlier. We got hit with another storm, a typhoon in September 1945, a year to the date from the hurricane. And that was a pretty bad one, but to me, I never got seasick after that first one, and it was horrible. There were a lot of deaths. We saw aircraft carriers with their flight deck peeled back like a tuna fish can. And we got through that okay. So we were all lined up for the invasion of Japan. This was in, August 6th and 8th, they dropped those bombs. We notified them that we were going to drop bombs. I have the newspaper saying the cities are going to hit. They knew that we were going to do something horrendous to them, but yet, they weren't going to give up. So we were all lined up for the invasion of Japan. As far as you could see, I think at Enawita and some on Okinawa. And we were the first DE to go in there with the second wave and brought the 8th Cavalry in with us. And when we went into Tokyo Bay, we looked, and our captain called us topside and said, "I'd like you to, all you crewmen, to come up here and take a look where we are and what you see." And as far as you can see, were cannon coming out of the hills at different elevations. Well, we didn't know at the time, but our duty was, if it were an invasion, our DE was to go into Tokyo Bay and ground ourselves and be a communication ship for all the landing craft. Well, if we had grounded ourselves, and we'd have been sitting ducks, we'd have been wiped out within 5 minutes. And that stuck in my craw, and I said, boy, we were expendable. But, thank God it was an occupation rather than an invasion.
Now were you in the radio room when this came through about the atomic bombs? Do you recall?
Oh, yeah, let's see. I probably was, but all of those messages were decoded and given to me. Yes. And then we knew that the war was short, and I was writing letters. I have all my letters. My mother saved every letter I had, so I used quite a bit of them in a journal I wrote. But I mentioned all of that. And I said, "Dad, this war is going to be over. This war is going to be over." And August 15th.
Now, did you ever go ashore in Japan?
Oh yeah, we were one of the first to go ashore in northern Japan. We went ashore in Yokosuka. It used to be it was a naval hospital. They converted it into a naval hospital. It used to be a training. We went ashore there, and I hate to say it, but I guess we sort of looted. We just went into different little 5 and 10s and took little souvenirs and thought nothing of it. And then we went to northern Japan, the northernmost islands, Ofuna, Amori, and we saw these Japanese, and they were about 6'2", and I couldn't believe it. Usually they're little peanuts, And I guess that they're part Mongolian and so forth, and what they did is they got their Imperial Marines from the northern. So we went ashore. We were one of the first Americans to go ashore with a sidearms and with an officer, and we were walking around and just observing, and people came out of a barber shop. One guy came out with a razor and looking at us, and I didn't know if they knew the war was over or not. Hopefully they did, because we would have been sitting ducks. But we saw evidence of some of the deaths. We saw a couple of bodies in the islands near Japan, and I know in my letters home I was so thrilled. I said we should kill all of these chaps and nips, and I wrote home and I said, I'm sorry this war. Today is August 15th, it's the Feast of the Assumption, and the war is over. But for some reason, I'm not happy. I don't like the idea of unconditional, just go in there and wipe them all out, because they would have done the same to us. And reading those letters 60, 70 years later, I said, you know, why was I so jaded? But I guess it was the times, and you had to be there.
Yeah.
And when you hear, I had buddies from school. One twin died in his arms of his other twin in a merchant ship that was in my grade. And I had a lot of another buddy that was lost in a navigator in a B20, B17, I think, over Europe. And then the Indianapolis, I thought. So I was very bitter. And, you know, even to today, Japan is a great nation, great democracy. But a lot of people don't realize, up until World War II, from the time in the beginning of almost AD, it was a horrendous, horrible nation of pillage and rape. I mean, up until China in 1935, they were noted for that. And today it bothers me when I watch the History Channel and I see these prisoners of war. And I also had a friend that was in the Bataan death march that survived. And when they talk about, they say, the Japanese, the this and that, I said, you know, what's wrong? Why can't we use the word Jap or the words Nip today? We use those words then for brevity. Or Jap for Japanese, Nip for Nipponese, Dane for Danish, Jew for Jewish, right down the line, Czech for Czechoslovakian. And yet they can't use the word for somehow the revisionists make us feel like it's a dirty word, which it wasn't. It was the expletive before and after the word that is a no-no today. And I mentioned the fact that thank God that Czechoslovakia wasn't the invader, because if these news people had to write that and announcers had to say Czechoslovakia 10, 20 times during, you know, they'd run out of ink for the newspapers and the broadcaster would be hoarse. But that's one thing today that bothers me, is when even those, you see the History Channel, once in a while they'll say Jap or Nip, and it looks like they're allowed to say, look, you can't use those words, but I see nothing wrong with it. Yanks for Yanks, Scots for Scots, the same thing.
Yeah. Now you had an interesting story, something that happened in the Philippines shortly after the end of the war.
Oh my gosh. The war was over. The war was over in August 15th, 1945. And at that time, we were all celebrating, and we were throwing everybody over the side, including the skipper. And he broke out the Seagrams. He had about 8 cases of Seagrams that we didn't know that. He got these big pots, coffee pots with water, put the Seagrams in, and it came out, now all hands spliced the main brace. In the old sailing days, they used to break out the rum. So we were happy, we were drinking and throwing everybody over the side. And I still had to sit at my desk there copying. And then our orders were to go to the island and truck. The Japanese that know the war was over, it's like the day after. Or if they didn't adhere to the order of ceasefire, and they had sunk an American ship, so our skipper headed right into the island of truck, and it was lit up like a Christmas tree, and we dropped some depth charges, and we saw debris. We could have gotten us up, though. No, he was feeling no pain, believe me, so our exec relieved him and was cautious, and we got the word to get out of there because we were in a minefield. So that was the day the war was over, the day after. But 6 months later, in December, I copied a message stating that in the island, in the Philippines, in a little town called Borongan, there was a contingent of Japanese soldiers that didn't know the war was over. And they'd been coming down into the village, and they'd be raping their women and kill a couple of villagers, and stealing their livestock and chickens and so forth for food. So there's an American major by the name of Sokol, S-O-K-O-L, was with the Filipino guerrillas, and they asked to come aboard the Burrows to go into this village of Borongan and go up into the hills and get these Japs And so we brought him aboard, and we brought him into Barong, and then it took a few days of contact, and we went out, we'd go back out to sea and come back, and he went up, the guerrillas and a couple of our guys with guns went up there, and they saw these 75 Japanese soldiers, and they had strung around them grenades, either around their necks or around their waists, and they were going to blow everybody up at the time. And we had an interpreter, and we convinced them that the war was over, and they would be treated like any prisoner of war and brought home. So they were to bring them down, and we deloused them, we showered them in the town square, and put them aboard ship to take them back to Manila. But the villagers were so thrilled, they had a big party for us. And they had some makeshift band, and they had a feast, and they were beautiful people. Some of them had never seen an American, but the missionaries did a great job. They were lovely people. And the only thing about that was rough about it is they had a drink called tuba juice that they made from, I think, the bark of the bamboo tree. And in all these little shacks, you could see the boiling pots of this vile, yellowish mixture of horrible concoction, and they call it tuba juice. And I remember one time filling my canteen with it when it was cooled, and just going through town and being with people. And the last thing I remembered was waking up on the boat deck a day later out to sea. So it was, they almost gave me a captain's mast for self-abuse or something. But I met a nun 60 years later. I was doing a story with these nuns, and she had in the Philippines during that time. And as the interview was over, I said, "Sister, how about that tuba juice?" And she looked at me, she says, "Oh, you little devil, you." She knew. But they were beautiful people. And we did, we liberated that island after the war.
Now, did you ever become a shellback also?
No, you mean below the
Equator.
equator? No. We got close to it. We were all of the chains of the islands, and we talk Philippines. We never got below and never got initiated.
Okay, when did you return to the States?
Let's see, March, April 1946. We had enough points to go home, and our skipper went around May 46, and I can remember getting in his whaleboat and going around, looking at the ship. And the ship was, what a beating that ship took. It looked like a scow, it just, it was horrible. I don't know how it ever made it. And you could see him saluting the ship and saluting us, and it's the first time I had any compassion for that skipper. And I really loved the man after that. And I did the same thing. I got out, about 3 in the morning. I had my buddy, the coxswain, take me out from San Pedro Harbor into San Pedro. I just didn't want to say goodbye to the guys. I was with these guys for 2 years. It was like family. And I just didn't want to say goodbye. So I went off the ship in a whaleboat about 3 in the morning, went ashore, and lined up with some Navy base there for my discharge back home, train trip back home to Sampson.
Okay. Did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
Thank God, yeah, thank God, the GI Bill. I went to Canisius College, and graduated in 1950. I guess it was the biggest class in the history, and I guess 60-70% of them were former GIs, so thank God for the GI Bill. I was able to get 4 years in college then.
Did you use the 5220 club?
The 5220, I used that for a whole year or two. Although I did look for work, and I did, but yeah, I took advantage of that, and that helped. 5220.
Okay, did you join veterans organizations at all?
You know, I didn't join the VFW or the American Legion. No, I was too busy raising a family and working 2 and 3 jobs to get through college, and always working 2 or 3 jobs. I ended up with 9 children, and that kept me going. But maybe 30 years after my discharge, downtown Buffalo, and I saw a convention of DESA, D-E-S-A, Destroyer Escort Sailors Organizations. I'll be darned. So I went and I joined up, and we went to meetings, and now it's 2006, and we're losing World War II veterans, 1,200 a day. And he came up to me 2 years ago. He says, "Fran," he says, "we'd like you to be our skipper of our," everybody was dying. And I said, "Well, okay." So I was the captain of the Destroyer Escort Chapter 4 here in Buffalo. But there's only about a half a dozen of us that are active, half of them, so I don't know how long that organization's going to last unless we could get people in, their families, or get other Navy people in from destroyers and other ships, but that's a dying breed also.
Yeah. Okay, so you have gone to reunions and so on, or not?
Well,
has your ship had a reunion, or did it ever have one?
This DESA, that for 60 years these ships have had reunions, and you read about 20, 30, 60, 100 guys. I have never seen a shipmate. I haven't gone to reunions when we had them here. I had one shipmate that lived in the suburbs I contacted, and about a half a dozen others I've kept in contact through the mail. But there's so many I wish I could have met, and being so busy, and then now coming in late with a computer, late in life, mastering it, we find out most of them are gone. But every so often I'll get a phone call. "Fran, this is so-and-so. Remember me? I was a boatman." Oh my God. And I have all the pictures of the crew from those days, and I could picture them. But if I bumped into them in the street, I wouldn't know what it was. But it's a thrill just hearing from some of the guys again. But unfortunately, I never met too many of them, face to face.
Did you ever get to see any USO shows?
Yeah. At Sampson, they had, remember Hell's a Poppin', which was popular then. I think it's still going 70 years later, I don't know. But I went to a USO there. And then in England, a couple of USOs. It was Times Square, a USO. And I was sort of a loner, I'd go in and maybe I'd have a couple of dances. And one thing we did, we had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys that sang barbershop harmony. And we'd sing barbershop harmony every time we went on Liberty. And going into a bar, I don't think we ever bought a drink because we were always singing, and we never got into too many fights because we were all happy. That wasn't always the case, but when we were singing with a group, we never had any problems. We sang all throughout England and all throughout the States when we had our liberties, and for a time we had 6 or 7, 8 singers. And we also had that's another thing too, we had a radio. I didn't know, there was no such thing as a disc jockey, and I never, but apparently I was a disc jockey during the Atlantic run, the year. During the convoy, we came up with the idea of a little radio show called Twilight Time. And as soon as Twilight came along, we'd come with the song, and Twilight harmonized our group. And then we'd play records, all of it, Frank Sinatra, Duke Ellington, and all of the vocalists of that day. And our ship would go in and out of the troop ships, and you could see the guys leaning over the railing listening to those records. We did that for a year, and courtesy of the Nazis, nobody bothered us during that twilight hour, maybe once or twice, but we did that, and it was such a thrill for so many people to hear those old songs. We even had little skits. We had the hillbillies aboard from Tennessee with their fiddles and their banjos and their guitars. We had an hour show, And we did this every night, and then we would read news. I copied plain language news from the States, sports news, and that was a great thing. And also aboard was an ensign who heard that I had done a little writing experiences in high school, and we got together and I interviewed 200 and some people aboard ship in the course of that year, and we sent articles home to their hometown newspapers. And then on the final day of victory, he wrote us a lead about where we were, and then used my other, and went out to all the hometown newspapers, and I never saw it in the Buffalo Evening News. So that's got me started on a career of broadcasting and news reporting.
How do you think your time in the service had an effect or changed your life?
Well, it made me think more about our country, my God. I became very patriotic. I became probably conservative. I became to dislike revisionists who are changing history. I came to dislike liberals who are also negative. I'm proud of the fact that I had grandchildren that went into all three services. I'm proud of them, and I'm proud of my country. I'm proud of my president, and I think it made me a better person. Although I had good training, I was an Eagle Scout. I was a member of a West Side Rowing Club. I was in good physical condition. I had great role models, and I just continued through my time in the service and out of the service, and just a happy guy. Very, very satisfied.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Well, thank you very much for all the time you're spending.